Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Hill of Roses, where we come once again to celebrate the best contributors to our independent policy movement for progress to bring power to the people. With us in today's program, we're going to get to talk to Andy Stern. I'm so excited for today's episode. Andy is a former president of the SEIU, one of the largest unions in America. He has been rated one of the top 10 most influential figures in healthcare by Modern Health magazine. He has been a media contributor on a variety of mainstream media outlets. He was a grassroots financier with Netroots. He has hosted this idea, the sliced bread contest, to try and get the best ideas in America. He's an author of A Country That Works, as well as Raising the Floor, as well as a senior fellow of the Economic Security Project. In today's conversation with Andy, I got to talk a lot with him. We first obviously had to go through his career and what led him to become a president of such a large union, as well as how he felt like he needed to innovate within that union. And then in the second part of our conversation today, we talk about the issues. We talk about the data behind the benefits that unions deliver. We talk about some of the societal impacts that caused the decline in unionization. We talk about his, unexpected conversation with Andrew Yang, inspiring him to Andrew Yang himself to run for president. And then finally, we get to have a conversation around what Democrats need to be doing to better improve unions, as well as does he think that Medicare for all is something that helps people on the healthcare front or hurts the unions more and should not be done. It was a really exciting conversation, and I was so honored that he came on today to be able to talk. I know you all are going to enjoy our conversation today with Andy so much. So let's get into it. Okay, we're here with Andy Stern. Andy, it's a pleasure to have you on. Truly an honor. Welcome so much to the Hill of Roses.
Hey, thanks, John. Glad to be here. I see the lovely roses behind you.
Yeah, no, it's a treat to be able to have you on. The first time we got to meet each other, and it was very brief. We got to do it during the Income Movement March, and it's so glad that we got to reconnect right before we have the next one upcoming. And
pretty exciting, yeah.
Yeah. So, what I wanted to really do in today's episode, getting to talk with you is, in this first part, I really wanted to understand a little bit more about your life journey. You've been able to do quite a lot in your time. And so I really wanted to first focus, obviously, on the main thing, which is you're the former president of the SEIU. And I wanted to hear, what caused that rise to becoming president? What inspired you to want to be involved in that union work? And what were your objectives to try and get done, which made you want to become the president?
So I would say I'm the accidental union president. I mean, this was not, I always wish I had a story that my father had been out on strike and I had been inspired by the heroism of the workers or, some other lovely family tradition that had led me here. But the truth was I grew up in a middle-class family where, unions weren't actually even discussed, either good or bad. They just really weren't in our suburban life, very much. And so, after getting very involved in sort of social movements and anti-war movements in college, not knowing what I was going to do next and very much trying to avoid law school, I got a job in state government. And, I went there not because I saw it as a career. It was sort of a holding place. But I was very interested about welfare rights and the rights of the recipients and how they could be joined together with the rights of the workers. And so my intention was, and spent a lot of time trying to build relationships, which were a little bit weird being like a 22-year-old white suburban person trying to pass through other people's lives and communities where they had spent a lot of time and effort trying to make changes. So it was a learning experience in that sense, but it also introduced me to the union. And I went to the first union meeting more inclined to try to learn from them what they were doing about changing the clients' lives, not necessarily their own lives.
Sure.
And then got very much involved in sort of finding a job that allowed me to do three things I always wanted to do. And, one was sort of be a lawyer, two was somewhat be a psychologist, and three was completely disrupt the status quo at any opportunity I had. And the union just sort of provided that. And from there, I kept sort of trying to be a change agent because as I sort of kept coming up against the union and its mission and people and fear of change, I was always trying to push further. And it turned out the best way to push further was just try to run for office when the opportunities came. And, I continued to do that, and eventually got very lucky that John Sweeney, who was then the president of SEIU, later the president of the AFL-CIO, asked me to come and build what was then a non-existent organizing program into something a lot different. And from there, I just found my passion of giving, power to the powerless, to janitors and home care workers and nurses' aides and childcare workers who really, on their own, were not heard and often not seen. But through the union, we just learned, they could be a powerful force. And so that propelled me eventually to want to be in charge of the union when John Sweeney left. And after a very vicious kind of campaign where I was fired from my job, I arose as the president, and then the rest is kind of my Wikipedia page.
Yeah. And, I have to say, during that time you were president, I think there was a lot of innovative initiatives that you put forward. One of which was you were listed in Modern Health magazine as one of the top 10 most influential figures in healthcare. And you built a media contributor arm of the organization. And you were, had a lot of interesting kind of grassroots connections to politics. And so I'd love to hear what your general philosophy while you were president of key initiatives you were trying to drive forward through your time. I know you wanted to be a change agent. What specific changes were you trying to make?
Well, originally, almost all the changes were, how can we improve the lives of our members and the people that work in our industries? So that started with, we had to unite the strength workers who did the same type of work, which means we had to bring them into our organization. We needed to make sure that even if they were in separate locals, but they worked for the same employer, like an HCA or a Beverly Nursing Homes, they learned to bargain together and fight together and try to win together. And so, it was started from there. And then we began to think, well, what else is needed to be successful? Well, we need a political operation. We needed to be in the media. And then we learned, no, we didn't need to only be in traditional media. We needed to be in the emerging online media. We need to make our members the face and voice of politics. So rather than just giving money to politicians, in my first election, I said we wanted to have 10,000 members volunteer in the 1996 election in politics, and we exceeded that goal. But by the time I left, we had 100,000 members participate in the 2008 presidential election. So we really built this army of members, and so we began to be seen as, our politics were not because we wanted to be on the Democratic National Committee or we wanted to get to the nice state dinners or events. We wanted our members' issues, to be at the forefront, of our political work, because members didn't really care about politicians, they cared about issues. And so we just kept developing what we thought it took to win. And eventually that became questions about, well, how is the union structured? How are resources aligned? What is the role of the AFL-CIO? Does it really contribute to what we were trying to accomplish? Is there a better way to do it? So we used to say we need to confront everything that we had control over and decide if it was really serving the interest of our members. And if it wasn't, since God didn't create constitutions of unions or the number of local unions, people did, that we had to have the courage to make the change, because in the end, the members really were interested in winning. And for them, winning meant changing their lives, having more flexibility, getting a better pension, having healthcare for the first time. Whatever it was, for them, that was winning. And, our goal was to try to figure out how to do that for them.
I'd love to ask you, as you had mentioned, the first time you were trying to get involved with these political campaigns was in 1996. How do you feel that relationship with the Democratic Party has gone to today? Do you think that has been strengthened? Do you think it's been weakened? How would you define that relationship with the Democratic Party and unions?
I'd say it's a somewhat abusive relationship, in the sense that people say they want to hear our voices, but in many cases, they really just want our money or our members and don't really, see those members of having the same role as the people they meet at nice fundraisers in fancy hotels or people's houses. And so, I don't think it's a overly wholesome relationship, even though I think, Democrats in general and the party in general, is closer to the issues of members, but there's a big need. And I would say that most successful thing we once did, and we started to keep doing it and we let it go, and I feel bad about it as a leader, was, we decided that the union really had to be much more about holding politicians accountable. And in fact, at one of our conventions, we had the judge from television from Detroit, Michigan, I can't remember his name right now, actually hold a trial of Democratic politicians who our members nominated who had let us down. And then the members then voted as if they were the jury about who was the most duplicitous Democrat who had made promises and not followed through. And then we gave that candidate who was opposing that person, $250,000 or $500,000 to run a campaign, and members loved it because, they hate hypocrisy. They much rather hold people accountable, than just hear nice speeches. And and then we created an organization called They Work for Us, which was to try to hold Democrats accountable. We gave money to a third party and said, here are the issues we're concerned about. Find the people who are Democrats not living up to them and have no reason in the districts they are, to be overly attentive to corporations or big business. And so, that I think was the best thing we did. It certainly grabbed Nancy Pelosi and Steny Hoyer and a number of people's attention. It elected people at the time like Donna Edwards and Senator from Maryland, his name now escapes me, but Chris Van Hollen. And, so we developed a whole group of people who otherwise probably wouldn't have been elected because the incumbents that were running just didn't serve our interest. And I think we need a lot more of that for those of us that had power or had members, to really shape the Democratic Party by somewhat what's happening now in a lot of places where AOCs and DSA members are forcing the primaries way to the left. They're making candidates really much more responsive to a different set of issues. And so I just think creating that tension around issues is really ultimately the answer for the labor movement.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree with you on that point. The next thing I'd love to ask you about during your career is you are an author. You've written 2 books, A Country That Works, as well as Raising the Floor. I'd love to ask you, what was your inspiration for writing each of those books?
So the first book was really trying to get union members, workers, union leaders to realize the world was changing faster than we thought. And things that now seem so obvious were so controversial that, China was going to become the dominant economy, in the world. Trade was really going to put pressure on workers' pay, that healthcare really should not be employer-based, which the union movement, had always supported, but it really needed to be more of a social benefit than a worker benefit. That, there were other issues, where we needed to address ourselves to the way that work was going to be provided in the 21st century, whether it turns out now to be platform work, gig work, freelance work, that the union movement was really, too traditional in how it was approaching a really wide set of growing kinds of different sets of employment and transitions from one set of economies to another set of economy. We missed Silicon Valley's growth as a labor movement, when it was small and when we could have shaped it a little bit better. So that book was really about the world is not working the way it did in the 1950s, 60s, and 70s. We not only had a new century, we had a new economy. And we needed to all, and I outlined a whole series of things I thought we needed to do. The second book, which is Raising the Floor, was basically realizing that not only had those changes already occurred and now seemed just very obvious to people, but now there was a whole new set of technological advancement that was coming our way. And, as someone once said, we're in the early part of technology, machines acted like, machines were like people, people were made into machines. Yeah. In the next thing, machines were going to be made into people. So AI and all these things were taking where we had once thought of technology as kind of the non-creative, traditional, repetitive work was going to be removed. Now we're taking mind work, accounting work, surgery, investing, private equity, decision making. We're all being done, by machines that once were only able to be done by people, and that we were just completely unprepared. And it was being built on top of a system that was incredibly promoting inequality. So when I wrote the book, a lot of these things again were, less obvious than they are today. I think the pandemic has just made the inequality thing, just so apparent. But it was sort of, we're building a new economy on a really bad foundation, and it's really going to be bad for workers if we don't do something different. And my answer was, that although I started to write the book with the answer was going to be guaranteed jobs, as time went on, it just seemed to me that the whole question of work and jobs was a really complicated one. That technology actually gave us the potential of having more choices, and less work as opposed to more work or 3 jobs or whatever it took to raise the family. But we needed a floor. We needed to raise that floor, and we needed to raise that floor and end poverty one for all. And that turned out to be my belief in a universal basic income.
Okay, yeah, I wholeheartedly agree with that determination. Universal basic income is one of the top priorities of our own organization here at the Hill of Roses. So we were super glad to be able to see
That's
you
great.
come out with that book and be a prominent advocate in that space. The last question I wanted to ask you about, your own career was currently today you're a senior fellow of the Economic Security Project. Could you let the folks out there know a little bit more about what you guys do with the Economic Security Project?
Yeah, I mean, the Economic Security Project was formed with the simple premise that cash, giving people money, whether it's in UBI, whether it's in $1,200 pandemic, whether it's in a new EITC, but giving people cash has to be a fundamental part of the social safety net. That we can't have all these categorical programs that run people through, all kinds of demeaning and situations about eligibility, all these confusing regulations. If you make too much money, you don't qualify for Medicaid. That cash and giving people responsibility over their own lives was really important. And so the Economic Security Project, which spans a sort of a wider view than I necessarily, adhere to completely, starts with a premise: giving people cash is the right next step in the evolution of the social contract.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree with that. It's great to see a lot of these organizations step up to just put money directly into people's hands. So, Andy, thank you so much for helping understand the collective of the Andy Stern experience. I hope everyone will join us when we go into our second part, where we talk about the actual issues and the tangible benefits around what unions deliver. And finally, what would we be recommending to the Democratic Party so that we don't have to hold them accountable? They're already accountable. So join us in part 2, where we talk a little bit more on these pressing issues. Okay, we're back in our second part with our conversation with Andy Stern. We just wrapped up kind of going through the gamut of what Andy Stern has done in his career. And it's now that we talk about the issues. And I think first and foremost, Andy, I think you are going to be one of the leading experts in understanding the benefits of unions, having been a president. A lot of people have the general sense that unions can be positive for workers. Can you give us some of the data behind what unions have been delivering in terms of benefits for the working class of this country?
I mean, there's a historical set of factors that I just think need to be understood, not overly spend too much time on, because they're somewhat ancient history, but important to understand that, whether it's what we take for granted now as a 40-hour work week, whether it's the issue of overtime if you work beyond 40 hours, whether healthcare as a job benefit, health and safety protections as a job benefit, equal pay for men and women and for workers of colors and white workers are all statistically, if you study this, union workplaces are more equal, more safe, better wages, better benefits than the same workers who work in a non-union workplace. And then unions on top of that, have been big proponents of pensions and training and apprenticeships and additional set of benefits that give workers an opportunity over a longer career to actually succeed. And so statistically, you are so much better off, in terms of your wages and benefits and safety and equality in a union workplace, and a lot of those benefits now have been expanded society-wise, like paid time off or other things that were really the not invention, but the proponents of and the expansion of was really a union phenomenon.
And I think that is so apt because, when we look at our economic figures in general of economic inequality, we've seen, a direct negative correlation. When union membership has dropped since the 80s, economic inequality has rapidly expanded. So I'd love to ask, in your opinion, we're now at a rate where it's around, I think last I checked, it's around like 10% of people are in unions, where in the past it was over double that membership level. What do you think have been the factors in your mind that have caused this decline in union membership over time in America?
So first, I think we need to take responsibility for what was in our control. And that was, most businesses that grow, have sales forces. They spend money on growth. It's not a natural phenomena that you create something and don't advertise. Whether you're a candidate or whether you're a business, there's a reason that people grow, because you have something you need to share with people and convince people and persuade people. The labor movement grew very rapidly. And in the 1950s, for a number of different reasons, post-World War II, they consolidated. The AFL merged with the CIO, so there wasn't competition anymore about which union you were going to be in. The unions, therefore, had a lot of power and a lot of status in society. They represented in the private sector nearly 1 out of every 3 workers, and their contracts really set. They, rather than raising minimum wage, it was when the auto workers got a raise. Everybody had to pay that raise, whether you were at a fast food or a steel mill or someone else, because union wages sort of set the economic framework going forward. And so, the world changed. The 50s became the 60s. Trade and foreign competition, and Japan began to, create auto plants in our country and compete with us. And we just sat around a little too fat, happy, and lazy, because the money kept coming in from the members we had. And the world changed around us, and we lost controls of our industries. So the auto workers went from representing every single auto worker of every single plant in America to representing less than half today. And so the world changed and we didn't. Silicon Valley grew up. And most importantly, probably the employers decided that this social contract, like a Germany, where unions and we were all part of the network and social contract and social fabric of the country, wasn't going to exist. And they were going to start putting their own demands on the table. They were going to, quote, double breast, create factories under different names that were not union. Ronald Reagan came along and fired the air traffic controller and set a signal. And then from that day on, from Scott Walker forward, there's been this aggressive, anti-union, ideology that's permeated business and permeated the Republican Party a lot, at least, and parts of the Democratic Party as well. And we never figured out a way to respond. What we tried to do at SEIU, and we grew, 1.2 million members when I was there, was to say that, we can't represent the members we have when there are workers doing the exact same job right down the street for less wages and benefits. So we either bring those workers' wages up, or they're going to drive our workers' wages down. And where it works, like New York City, where janitors make $55,000 a year, not because someone couldn't find a janitor at less pay, but everybody knows if you don't pay janitors the prevailing rate, there's going to be a big fight with the real estate owner or the management company. And so we've created, somewhat of an artificial rate above the market, the union rate, that has given those workers a real opportunity to have not only a good salary, but fully paid pensions, fully paid health care. But you can see in a non-union market, those janitors make minimum wage and have no benefits. And so, unless we do our job of taking wages out of competition, then the rates just are going to fall. And it's what they do when they're not unions around. And as we get smaller, the rates keep falling, more and more.
Yeah, and I think you're kind of alluding to one of the points that I think a lot of people who are not like super active within unions, but know a little bit about it, they've heard of these right to work laws. And I'd love to hear, in your opinion, do you think those that are not union members should be getting the same benefits as union membership? Because in my opinion, there is this trade-off. Like, on the one hand, if you have them at the same level, then your union members are feeling like, what am I getting as a benefit for being a union member? But at the other hand, if you say they get worse benefits, then you kind of get undercut. How do you feel that needs to be addressed? Obviously, we're working to try and overturn these laws. But in the interim, while these laws are in place, what do you think is that role that unions should be playing? Should they be trying to help those non-unionized members increase their benefits?
So my basic philosophy is somewhat like the government. I don't like the policies of my government today,
Sure,
but I pay my taxes because they are my government. And until I vote them out, which is my right, and elect people who say don't pay taxes, I'm going to pay my taxes. But my opportunity is to change my government. I think the same thing is true in a workplace. Workers voted you in. They're providing a service. You don't have to even join the union, but you have to pay for the services, just like I pay for the schools in New York City, even though I have no kids, attending them. And so I think that's kind of the fairest way. Is you don't have to be a member. You can vote the union out if you want to try, but until they're voted out, and you pay for the services they provide. In the long run, I think there's really questions about this whole financing scheme. And, there's certain things like the benefits we provide to members. We now are caught in this very complicated law called ERISA, and it ties us all up. But, in other countries, unions provide benefits, and they make their money because they provide the unemployment system, or they provide healthcare, or they provide training, and they get paid for it, right? Either by the government or the employer. And so the money from the members isn't the only thing, the way they sustain themselves. And then they can provide services to people that aren't technically, recognized in formal collective bargaining, but here in the United States, if an employer who doesn't have a recognized union wants to hire the union to do an apprenticeship program, it's actually illegal to do. It's a felony because you're giving money to a union. You're like paying them off, even though they're just providing the same service you would hire another consultant to do, except they're pretty good at doing apprenticeship programs. So I think there's a whole financing question, but in the meantime, and I think a different financing question would help us with gig workers and freelancers, to provide them benefits and build an organization that could also represent them a little bit differently than a traditional workplace. But in the meantime, I just think people need to pay their fair share, whether you like your government or you like your union.
Yeah, I think that's a very fair approach. So the next thing I'd love to ask you about is you're credited as, frankly, the inspiration for Andrew Yang having his recent run. I'd love to ask you what that conversation was like when he came to you, thinking about the potential for running for office and some of the things that you had told him during that.
So, I had written my book, and Andrew came and found me way before, he was running for president. And there was a debate that I had with some of the Obama economic people about a universal basic income, and he had come to that. And, we had just started talking. I went and visited his Venture for America, operation, and saw what he was doing, and we were just developing a nice relationship. And then one day he says, I want to have lunch with you. And so we scheduled a meeting to go to lunch. And, I say, what's up, Andrew? And he said, remember at the end of your book where you say the way we're going to get universal basic income, to the forefront of the American political situation is someone's going to run for president on a universal basic income program. I said, of course I remember, I wrote that. He said, well, I'm your person. Now, I must admit, I almost fell off the chair because, I never saw, and I saw Andrew as more of an intellectual, So I said to him, okay, Andrew, tell me why you think you could run for president. And, he gave me, I'd say, an 80% pretty good speech. And I said, okay, so how much money are you going to raise in the next 60 days, because, this is not something like, how many friends are you going to ask for $1,000, so that you can have $300,000 and sort of at least get started. So he said, I'm going to go make a list of all the people, that I could ask for money. And I think there's a lot of them. And I said, you have a huge network, I'm sure, and then I said, send me tapes of your giving speeches, because, I thought he was a little bit professorial. Yeah. And then when he got on the campaign trail, boy, did he make me look like an idiot. He was so good at being a candidate, because he was so sincere and so honest and funny, but empathetic, and told stories of his, about his wife and his kids that were really important parts of his own life. He just blew me away at how quickly, he went from kind of the intellectual, professorial venture capitalist, to a really, all out great campaigner.
Yeah, I certainly noticed that trend myself. He was a little rougher towards the beginning of the campaign, but he really hit his shine there. But I'd love to add, we were talking about beforehand how, not every Democrat has come to have the same common understanding with yourself in terms of what the labor movement is needing. And I'd love to ask you, what are some of the solutions and messaging that you think are needed for the Democratic Party to embrace, for them to hopefully reclaim the working class base that has started to fade from them?
Well, I mean, you would think the simplest thing for them to understand is that the only white male workers who vote Democratic in a majority are union members. Every other group of, and Jewish men, every other group of workers, does not vote Democratic. And that's because people talk to them about their work and their job and something that's important. They don't talk about social issues. They don't talk about immigration or law and order or defunding the police. They talk to them about which candidate, is good for you as it relates to your work. Not saying those other issues aren't important. It's just not what the union, focuses its attention on. And, I think workers, like most people, those issues, like what is their health care and who's going to be better about my retirement and my kids' student loans, actually really care about those things. And sometimes it's hard to hear what the candidates think in a very consolidated way from someone you trust, and so it was pre-Facebook list, where now you send it to all your Facebook friends because, you have a relationship with them. The union was that relationship, with a lot of people. And ever since, Democrats have weakened unions in states like Michigan and Wisconsin, all they've done is hurt themselves. Now, I've made that speech as to others, statistically and otherwise. It doesn't work compared to money, right? Because in the end, they think somehow if I could put enough ads on television, life will be beautiful. So I think the good news is that inequality has really made people aware that one of the best things about the labor movement, Ben Bernanke says, 25% of the inequality is due to the lack of union bargaining power or worker bargaining power. So I think we're now factually, and we can see it, that, all of a sudden, unions, aren't being able to raise people up, particularly lower wage workers, to get, the kind of life that they need to live, that a coal miner or a steel, worker, which are pretty crappy jobs. They just happen to be good union jobs eventually. So therefore they pay decent wages and benefits. So, I think there's that understanding. And there is a law called the PRO Act, that has actually passed the House of Representatives, which is pretty fabulous, and what it does is to sort of make the question of unionization a choice of the workers, not a battleground for the employers, that makes it quick, gives workers a choice, gets them a first contract, tries to make this an American experience, not a kind of a Vietnam War type or Iraqi war type experience. And so, I think it's incredible that the Democratic House has passed that. Now, sometimes they pass things because they know the Senate's not going to pass it, so they get a clean vote. But I think, you want to talk about holding people accountable in the next administration of what could really change the world for workers in the long run. It's like passing the PRO Act and having President Biden sign it into law. So I think we're way ahead of where we were when Obama was there, when there wasn't a lot of focus on it. And the inequality issue has made it even more relevant than just, am I for unions or against unions, as opposed to, well, how else are we going to try to, what are the different tools we have at our disposal to end inequality?
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree with you there.
Yeah.
Andy, my final question for you is, there was a lot of debate during this primary cycle around Medicare for All and its impact with unions. I'd love to hear what you think about Medicare for All and whether or not you think it will help unions, or, as some people have criticized, it's going to take away the leverage that they had with the healthcare benefits that they already negotiated. What's your opinions on Medicare for All?
So my opinion is this: I love unions, but every American deserves health care. And if you ask me if this was a race, how are we to get everybody health care, through unions or through Medicare for All? It's a no-brainer. Medicare for All has so much greater possibility, and we cannot play with people's lives and their health care as if somehow, because it hurts some group of 6% of the workforce or 10% of the workforce, we can't be for it. I think there is an issue we haven't talked enough about, which is Medicare is actually not the best way to provide health care, because it's just fee for service. So you don't necessarily have you don't have a Kaiser network, or you don't have a Medicare Advantage, or you don't have someone that actually cares that you get healthy, as opposed to just send you to the next doctor to get the next text. So I think we need to both, get everybody health care, and Medicare is the right way to do it, but we need to do it in a way we actually end healthcare inequities, which we now know exist even in Medicare. We need to, end, the places where we have excessive testing and no one's really caring about care. We don't look at nutrition. We don't look at climate or other things that affect health. So I think Medicare for All is the best, quickest way. And union people, I appreciate how much we've done to win these benefits, but like bargain benefits above the Medicare, add on the greatest dental plan or health spa that you can do, you get to bargain, but please, let's not stand in the way of the most important progress the country can make.
Yeah, and I frankly think it gives them more leverage in the sense that now you can just talk straight income and retirement benefits and disability and all these other things, now that that's no longer something that the employers can negotiate with. But Andy, it was a pleasure getting to hear your wisdom today and learn more about your career. Is there anything that you are hoping our audience might be able to check out that you have going on?
Nope. I think, you can check out, Raising the Floor of the book, but I think Andrew Yang's done a better job taking it to the next generations. So read his book and keep in touch with Andrew and, Humanity Forward and the Basic Income Movement and all the people that I think are trying to build the most important movement we're going to have in the 21st century, which is to create a floor and provide everyone, the end of poverty as we know it. And so, step up to the income movement, step up to the Economic Security Project or Humanity Forward, because this is our moment to make the most fundamental changes that the country desperately needs.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree with you. And frankly, we'll hopefully have, maybe if there are some New York City area people out there, you could see us all come the Income March that we're having in October. So, Andy, it's a pleasure to be able to talk with you so much. I hope we get to see each other come that March as well.
I do too. Take care now, John.
Thank you so much for watching today's episode of The Hill of Roses. We hope you enjoyed the conversation. If you did, please let us know by subscribing to our channel, liking today's video, and sharing the video with your friends. Also, if you want to be notified, please make sure you hit the bell when you subscribe. Finally, if you want to find more of our network's content, please go to thehillofroses.com. With that being said, we love y'all for helping the movement grow, and we hope you're staying rosy out there.